people always want to know how to do. How do I do this without having learned how to see it? If you don't recognize it when you see it, how are you going to do it?
How can you tell a good story from a bad story? On this week's episode of You Are a Storyteller, Brian McDonald and Jesse Bryan walk us through how to see. Because before you can tell the best stories, you have to learn how to see the best stories.
So this week's episode is all about learning how to see, right? Because the beauty is like once you can start to see these things in the wild, once you can start seeing them in your favorite movies or shows or even like music or books, it really starts changing things. It goes from being like a concept to like a real life thing.
Right.
And so here we go. How do you learn how to see?
Well,
there you go. Easy, right?
Well, before I say that, I should say that people always want to know how to do. How do I do this? How do I do that? How do I write a first act? How do I write subtext? How do I? It's always how do I do it without having learned how to see it, and that's the first step, right? If you don't recognize it when you see it, how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
So they jump right to do, right? Yeah. But first, see it. Learn how to see it. Learn how to see it effortlessly.
Yeah.
Right? And then you will be able to reproduce it more easily. So people overlook that step all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe
That's
they've seen
really
it once. Maybe they've seen it. Oh, I know how that works. No, you don't yet.
Yeah.
Let yourself internalize it. People rush.
Yeah.
They don't. I don't know what it is about our culture, but there's a rush instead of I'm going to spend my time. Sometimes if I want to learn something, I'll just go, okay, I'm just going to be bad at this for a year. And I'm going to, like when I started photography, it's like, okay, I'm going to work on this aspect of composition.
Right.
Right. First it was rule of thirds. Then it was leading lines.
Yeah.
Then it was frame within a frame. Then it was, I don't know, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the way I did it. And I built on it. So I just got to the point where one thing was second nature. And then I moved on to the next thing. I wasn't trying to rush things. That's the way I tend to work.
Yeah.
But I noticed that they want the whole thing.
But there's a weird thing in general, especially like you said, in our culture where the hurry thing is a big deal. It's almost like once you're in your 20s, it's like, well, I blew it.
Right.
Here I am.
Here I am in my 20s.
I just turned 30, and since I didn't figure out how to be the best photographer in the world or whatever, I just read an article about this because we're doing some other research for a different project, where everybody always talks about the entrepreneurs, big entrepreneurs that started a tech company or whatever when they were 19 or 20.
Sure.
And this thing came out and said the vast majority of successful entrepreneurs are 45 and above. Mm-hmm. And this kind of flew in the face of all the, perceived deal because there's a difference between this said successful entrepreneurs.
Okay, right.
They're like,
right.
so you'll get a lot of young folks starting stuff, and they'll fail or whatever. They'll learn and they'll learn and they'll learn and they'll learn. Then they'll get into like about mid-40s and they'll start to go like, wait a second. I can see that I was doing this wrong. Right. Or I need to focus more on my customers or whatever. And all of a sudden you start to see when people actually get really successful, it's actually in the 40s and 50s because they've kind of had life. So I guess don't be in such a hurry, right? Where it's like, I got to be able to do it out of the gate.
Well, I don't remember, and I'm going to get this all wrong. So there's probably somebody who knows this better than I do about Mozart. But, Mozart was performing and composing when he was a kid, right? 5, whatever. Mm-hmm. And people were like, wow, what a genius. I'm not saying he wasn't a genius, but apparently nobody performs that stuff he composed when he was 5 and 6 and 7. It wasn't until he was older that he was doing stuff that we know.
Yeah.
So he started early.
Yeah.
And he may have been good for a guy who was 5 or 6 or 7, but he wasn't the Mozart we think of until much later. And so he was just getting his time in early.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So people forget that things take time. We like the story of the person who just knows.
Yep.
We like that. But that lets us off the hook too. Right? Well, they're just talented, right? They just know how to do it. They're just good. Somebody I used to work with would say that to me all the time. Well, this stuff just comes naturally to you. It's like, I've spent hours, countless hours learning this. It's like, no, it does. It looks like it to you, It's what I always say that talent is what hard work looks like from the other side. Right?
Yeah, totally.
That's exactly right. That's what it is.
Yeah, they weren't there when you were a kid, like recording audio tapes of TV shows so you could listen back to them.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of those kind of aha moments? Like going back to like that idea of like, we call it a light bulb moment, the moment where you could see the scaffolding behind the home, or type of a deal.
Yeah, I think I had audio taped. I think it was the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which I did a lot of. I audio taped the Mary Tyler Moore Show and the Bob Newhart Show, and probably other shows, but those are the shows I remember doing. And this is before you could tape stuff at home because I'm 1,000 years old. But so there was no way to record the video. Yeah. So I would just record the audio, and then like some kids, like they read when they're supposed to be sleeping. I listened to these shows, and I started to figure out, oh, the first part of a show is about this, and the second part of a show is about that. I don't know how old I was when I figured that out. Maybe I was 10 when I figured that out, something like that. 10.
But that's when you started being conscious of these, right? Like, when did you even start thinking about, like, there's a person called a writer, and they're figuring this stuff out?
I don't know when I figured that out.
Yeah.
That I don't know. But I remember, I remember, maybe I talked about this, but I remember being, I think 5 in kindergarten and seeing a stop motion movie about King Midas. Did I talk about this?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I saw this stop motion movie about King Midas, and it was terrifying, because stop motion's terrifying, but it was also really intriguing. And that story stuck with me. Yeah. And I thought about it all the time. Now I know what movie that was. Like, it was Ray Harryhausen did the animation on it. It was one of the Puppetoons by George Powell. And anyway, but I know what it is now. Like, I've seen it since. But it's creepy. But it stuck with me. Yeah. And I started thinking a lot about stories after that. I remember very specifically thinking a lot about stories after that. But movies were always intriguing to me. But the story really got me.
Gotcha.
And so I think I cared more about stories at first and how they worked, but I don't know why. You know what I mean? I don't know where that came from.
Right.
And I'm not sure when I figured out, wait, somebody's writing this stuff? Yeah. I'm not sure when I figured that out.
And there's a process they're going through to build something good.
Yeah.
Right.
But I knew what I wanted to do. So I guess I knew somebody must have told me. So I knew what I wanted to do since I can remember.
Yeah.
So I was always just studying it. And so I learned how to see these patterns through repetition. So I wouldn't just listen to the show once. I would listen to it again and again and again and again to see why something made me laugh, why something like, oh, I see, they set it up way up here. They said this, and it's coming back now. So a lot of people are afraid of the repetition. So I will have a list of movies for people to watch sometimes, and they'll say, well, oh, I've seen this one, and I've seen this one, and I've seen this one. And so they'll decide that they don't need to watch those, even though maybe they've sat through a class and they have a different set of eyes now. Now they know what a first act is, or they know what clone characters are, or whatever. But they don't realize, it's like, yeah, but you saw it before. You weren't the same person you are now. Even age changes the way you view something. Yeah. Right?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So go back and look at it again. You're not going to get it once, but that's what people like to do. It's that rush thing.
That idea of the different set of eyes, right?
Yeah.
Also, that's a good thing.
Right.
If you're growing, hopefully, you're evolving and seeing things a little differently than you did before.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things I found to be really helpful is, for the benefit of those who've been able to like sit in a class and see these things where you can watch someone, sit with somebody who's like showing it to you. Okay, we're gonna watch this, the first act of Tootsie or whatever.
Right.
Here's what you need to look for. You're going to notice this, and the other thing. And as far as like baby stepping into it, right, where you can start to see something like, oh, dang, I never noticed that before, and I've seen that before, or Shawshank, whatever the thing is.
Right.
And so it seems like the first step is kind of like, kind of watch me do it.
Right.
Right. And I'm going to watch you do it. Now you watch it, and then you tell me, what did you see and whatever. Right. Like that process of like kind of, snagging it. Like, how does that work?
Well, I didn't have the benefit of that, so I don't think you need it.
Yeah.
People like it. It's a sort of training wheels feeling, right? But you don't need it. What you need is to usually we let a story wash over us. We notice the things that don't work usually, right? That dropped me out of it. We don't notice the things that are working. And I think that's, again, the repetition. So you can't be afraid to watch something over and over and over again, or
You
read
talked
something
about
over and
how
over
you
and
used
over
to go
again.
to movies, and you would like watch the movie
Yeah,
maybe a couple times.
Yeah.
This is back when you matinee. Or
you
whatever.
could just sit in the
you
movie
just
theater
sit,
back
and then
then.
you said you would turn around and like kind of sit to the side and watch it again to see how the audience reacted.
Right. So I would watch it a few times.
Yeah.
Just watch it and study it, and then I would watch the audience to see if they were engaged in the same places, were scared in the same places, or whatever. That was that helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Because I realized that the pattern, like, it wasn't just this audience that thought that was funny or thought
Yep.
this was scary or whatever. Like, it was consistent.
Yep.
So I knew you could be consistent.
And there's something bigger underneath this.
Yeah.
Because, man, at that scene, every audience, the last 3 audiences have all done the exact same thing.
Right. I went to the same movie a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so kind of through that process of, so really you're saying it's not even about, it's just the repetition. If you're watching close enough times, you will just naturally, and if it's a great piece of work.
Right, yeah.
That helps.
I grew up at a good time for movies.
Yeah.
So, the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
there were a
Lot of
lot of
good
good
stuff,
movies.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's harder now than
Right.
it was then.
Yeah. Could you actually sit down? I mean, just as far as like a really simple thing somebody can actually do at home, take E.T.
Yeah.
and every night for the next 4 nights watch it.
Yeah. You could do that.
You'll see it. Like,
Yeah. That's what you have to do. If you don't want to do that, well, then you don't want to do this. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be work. You know what I mean? In the way that you think of work. It's not homework in that way.
yeah.
I just needed to know how everything worked. I just needed, like people take their toys apart, I needed to know how a story worked, and I would take it apart that way. So, it wasn't boring
Yeah.
to get those flashes of insight,
Yeah.
because that's what happens if you stare at it long enough.
Yep.
You get flashes of insight.
You know what's funny about this, Brian, is when we talk about that idea of learning how to see. And the weird thing when we talk about stories is stories are so much bigger than what people think they are.
Right.
Right. So the first level of seeing is like, oh, here's how a story works. Where I think it gets really interesting is the next level of seeing. We were just in Memphis. You were speaking at a conference, and you were talking about a concept we're not going to talk about for a long time. In fact, until your book comes out,
Right.
called Land of the Dead. Right. And the coolest part about the Land of the Dead stuff was when your audience was starting to see that concept, that story concept, in their own lives.
Right.
Right? When people start to see these stories, like what you can see the structure side, and then you start to see that in your own life, how some of these principles play out in your own life, like why you love E.T. and how
Right.
you needed to learn empathy like Elliot, and how that's, boy, dang, I was actually, when I was crying, I was actually thinking about myself and I didn't realize it. Or
Yeah.
when I watched Shawshank, I was reminding myself that I need to get busy living, right? And when you can not only see the structure inside the story, but also how those stories are affecting you as a person, right? I think that's also part of that kind of level of how stories help you learn how to see.
I think that's true. I think that when you, there's a level you get to, like you said, where, the first level, actually, who talks about this really well is Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So there's a whole thing in there where he talks about how young people are stuck on the surface of things. And so all they see is the surface. How cool is that? That looks cool. That looks shiny,
Yeah.
right? And I see that a lot. Oh, I like the style of this. I like the camera moves. It's all on the
Costume,
surface.
whatever.
Yeah. And then, there's you get below that to another level of understanding, and below that and below that. And at the center of it is idiom. And that's why you do what you do.
Yeah.
It's beyond the how you do it.
Yeah.
Right? And people stop. Since I read that piece, I can see where people are stopped when I talk to them. Some people stop at any stage. People can stop at any stage.
Yeah.
But you get to idiom, and it becomes about how this thing, what's the word I'm looking for? It becomes part of you in a very different way.
Yeah.
And it becomes a sort of a guide for you in a very different way.
Can you give me an example of that? Like, what do you mean guide? I think guide is a really interesting word.
Well, if you know, like when I went, wait a minute, stories are for survival information. When that hit me,
Yeah.
well, that changes the way I listen to stories. Right? It changes the way I listen to your story. It changes the way I read stories. It changes the way I watch a movie.
Yeah.
Right? If I know that there's something in there that's going to help me survive this,
Yeah.
well, then I listen differently. And then if I'm creating something, I create differently because now I have a responsibility.
Right.
Right? You don't have a responsibility when you just want to do cool shots or say cool lines or whatever, right? No responsibility there. That's all about you. That's your ego.
Yeah.
But when you get past all of that and you're like serving a bigger thing, then you take on a responsibility.
Yeah.
And that can be daunting. So sometimes people stop because they don't want that responsibility.
Yeah, because once you actually understand that the true power of like what's the storytelling, right? We talked about, the old Native American proverb, those who tell stories rule the world, and how an updated version of that is just whoever tells the best story is going to win, right? And you start realizing stories aren't for kids, and the stuff. Once you learn how to tell a story, you can use that to do all sorts of great things. You could use it to help try to rally the folks in the United States to. And around the world to fight the Nazis, or you could use stories to try to, raise money for the Boys and Girls Club, or you could use stories to recruit people to do awful stuff.
Yeah.
Right. But that's how we think. It's how we work as people.
Right.
And once you understand that, like, storytellers have a much, especially once you understand it, right, have an obligation to telling good stories, I would hope.
Yeah.
Right? And knowing that people will consume them and it changes how people think and feel and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe that, it's like, well, go to a movie and look around. Does anybody ever get emotional? Stories change how we think, how we feel. Well, how we feel and then how we think after that, because you're affected emotionally. So there's a burden that comes along with this stuff once you understand it.
What's interesting is the confusion about what stories are for seems to be new in the world. So it seemed like people understood why they told stories before. You can tell by the kinds of stories they told, right? When stories weren't about making money, right? Because that confuses the issue.
Yeah.
Right? They weren't about making money. They were about engaging an audience. They were about imparting wisdom and knowledge and information to an audience. And so they were constructed much differently. So the stories that we have that are very old, The Boy Who Cried Wolf or something like that.
Yeah.
Nobody was trying to make money off that story.
Yeah.
Right? So its purpose is clear to us. Right? Once it becomes a money-making thing, it gets muddy because it's like, people like wolves. They like that wolf story. They like wolves, right? That only had one wolf in
bigger.
It. What if we had, 10 wolves? Better story. It's like,
10
no,
times as good.
10 times as good, so it changes how you approach the whole thing when you say, oh, wait, how have people done this forever? Right? That's why I'm not big on the new. It's like, it's a new way of telling stories. It's new. It's an ancient thing.
It's about as ancient as it gets.
It's about as ancient as it gets. And so it works fine. It works fine. You don't need to fix it. You need to master it.
That's interesting.
Right? That's usually people haven't mastered it and they think something must be wrong with it. You said something and it reminded me of this and hopefully there'll be a place for it in this show. But I was just thinking about, I often think about, maybe because we were in Memphis and we went to the spot where slaves were traded, right? So I've been thinking a lot about that stuff and about slavery, and I think about how the slaves used stories and the Brer Rabbit stories.
That's right.
Right? The Brer Rabbit stories, which I sort of wish were reclaimed, because I think that the Disney of the 1940s made a sort of stereotype and they sort of ruined it. And even some of the books before Disney sort of ruined it. But the slaves used these stories about this trickster rabbit to pass on information about how to outsmart the thing that is more powerful than you, the person who's more powerful. How do you get what you want and what you need when you seemingly have no power, like a rabbit, right? That's a really important thing to impart to people.
Yeah.
right? They knew why they were telling those stories, right? And they used them,
Wow.
right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all about, was all about, how do you outsmart the
I
more
have it in my
powerful?
library. My grandpa used to read them to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what people, until the ride came out at Disneyland or whatever, I didn't know. I was like, I didn't know anybody even else knew about these stories.
Oh, really?
And so I had no idea, because my grandpa would read those stories.
Yeah.
Brer Rabbit, Brer Bear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And don't throw me in the briar
Briar
patch.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. I remember all that. I didn't realize that slaves would tell those stories.
Yeah, that slaves. It's interesting. The origin of them is muddy because they had stories like it in West Africa, but the natives here also had stories with trickster rabbits in them, and they're not sure exactly how Brer Rabbit came out.
But that was a way to tell these stories to folks around you without necessarily saying, "Hey, when this guy shows up, right?
Yeah.
Here's how he's going to want to do horrible things," and
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I know that.
Yeah.
But they knew why they were telling it.
Yeah. So that
There was no merchandising angle attached to it.
Right. Yeah. They weren't trying to sell toys.
Yeah, they were trying to help these young people around them make it.
Right. This is how you survive. Right? Everybody used to know that. You look at Zen parables, you look at that's the way everybody told stories for thousands of years. They knew that they were imparting information, right? So if you
people really aren't going to like this, but this is okay. It's just something to make, we're just trying to spark conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether or not you agree, but talking about, okay, well, if that's the position of storytellers is to impart survival information, help people get unstuck, that sounds really similar to a shaman or a priest.
Right.
Or those types of other positions in communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where it's like, oh, you're stuck? Well, let me tell you a story about...
It's the same job.
Yeah.
We've separated those jobs. But those jobs used to be all together, right? So the holy person or shaman and the storyteller and the healer, that was all one job.
Yeah. Can you talk about why you included the healer? I like that you included that.
The healer?
Yeah.
Well,
if I said, what does stories have to do with healing? I guess is my...
Oh.
I was thinking about the red badge stuff you do.
Right. Oh, yeah. When helping vets tell their stories with red badge. Healing... Well, I know because, we use stories for healing all the time, right? 12-step programs use it, right? People who have some kind of trauma like PTSD for some reason will share stories for medicinal reasons. People who've survived cancer will be in groups. I know somebody who's in a group, right?
Yeah.
Right.
There was that vet that came up and talked to you in Memphis. She just got back.
Yeah.
And she was talking about how hearing how stories worked helped her even start to unwind some things.
Yeah. So we know they're healing.
Yeah.
We use them that way, right? But we forget when we sit down to make a story, we forget that that's what we use them for.
Right.
Right. But in Ayurveda, which is the oldest form of medicine still practiced, in Ayurveda, one of the things they used to do, from what I understand, and maybe they still do, is when you came to the practitioner with a problem, they would give you a story to contemplate because the answer would be inside that story.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? So
where we give a prescription
Yeah.
and say, think about this.
Yeah.
Along with whatever, but think about this.
Yeah.
That's nuts. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we've always
like
known.
magic.
It is. We've always known that that's what stories are for. It's just a recent thing that we don't know.
Yeah.
But if you start to be able to see how people use them, because people use them in real life for these reasons, right?
Yeah.
To warn somebody about this, to let them, know about this problem or that problem, or how to overcome something, or,
Right.
Or even the fact that they're not alone in their suffering in some way, right? Which is what often the 12-step programs are. Because what they tell you is, this is what happened to me. I lost my wife, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, if they got through it, I can get through it.
Right.
There's survival information in knowing you're not by yourself
Yeah.
and that other people have survived it, right?
And you walk out feeling a little less lonely, and that does heal you. I mean,
Right.
we know what stress does to the body. We know what anxiety does to us, and we know what emotions do to our body.
Right.
And then sometimes it tells you a story, and you walk away and you feel lighter.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? It's more than just, I don't know, a flimsy thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so there's an episode, I play it in class sometimes. I don't know if you've ever heard me play it, but there's an episode of the show This American Life where there's a kid who has mosaic Down syndrome. And mosaic Down syndrome is like Down syndrome, only you could have mosaic Down syndrome and look like a person with Downs and have an average or above average IQ. Or you can not look like a person with Downs and have a deficit in your cognitive ability, right?
Yeah.
So it could, anywhere on that spectrum, mosaic Downs.
I didn't know. I've never heard this.
So you can be anywhere on the spectrum. And so they don't know how it's going to shape up until you get to be a certain age, right?
Yeah.
So the story's about a woman whose son had mosaic Downs, but she didn't want him to know because she took him to school one day, and it was like his first day of school. And when she came to pick him up, all the kids were doing something, and he was like finger painting or something on the ground. And the mom was like to the teacher, like, why is my son? Oh, he likes doing that. We don't want to bug him. And she's like, I don't want my son to not be treated like a regular kid. So she didn't tell him. She didn't tell the teacher. She didn't tell anybody. But he started to suspect because he would get teased, and he had the way he processed information was a little different, and the way he talked was a little different. And so finally, he was a teenager or something, she finally told him. You know, it was really hard for her to do it, and her husband, and she sat down and because he asked, he's like, is there something, do I have a medical issue that you're not telling me about? Yeah. And at first she'd let that go and tried to change the subject, but finally she's like, we have to tell him. Yeah. So she tells him, and she says, well, you know, you have mosaic Down syndrome. And the interviewer says, what did that make you feel? What did you think of when she said that? And he said, it made me think of Storm, Wolverine, Colossus, whatever, the X-Men. Yeah. And the interviewer, you can hear a little bit of a chuckle that she says, why did it make you think of the X-Men? He says, because they're mutants and they have special powers because they're mutants. Wow. I thought it was kind of cool.
That's awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. So
it helped him.
It helped him. Yeah. And it's the X-Men, right? That's a really good example of how I don't believe in story hierarchy, right? That King Lear is better than that. You know, I mean, I'm not saying King Lear's not good. I'm saying King Lear's not the story that everybody needs. Yeah. Right? Right? The X-Men was what that kid needed. Right. It wasn't going to help him to read King Lear. Yeah. Right?
And it's awesome that somebody made the X-Men so he could have them when he needed them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. It's magic.
Yeah, it is.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
To be able to do this for a living, right? And understand the power of it. What you can do it's unbelievable. And so, and once you can see that stuff. Right. Everything really changes. It starts to shift pretty fast.
Yeah. So see it. Look in the world and see how people use stories. How are people? That's we've talked about it before, but you have to learn how to see this stuff in the natural world. You have to see how people talk. You have to see when they impart information to each other and how they do it. Everything you need to learn is in the natural world in terms of storytelling. Yeah. We do it all the time, and we do it for the right reasons. Yeah. We just forget when we sit down in front of the computer to do it. We think we have to do something else, that we have a different task. Yeah. But it's the same task.
And man, once you get this stuff, like that young man, like who got that story, somebody did their job. Right. When they did the X-Men, it was a clean enough story where you could read it and get it. Right. And understand it. You know, like I guess I'm trying to go for simplicity, right? Sometimes like you talk about what's the difference between if I'm talking to my kids, if I'm talking to my friends, my family, people I care about, I'm trying to tell a story in a way that they get it because I want them to do well. Right. I'm not trying to trick them or go, I bet you didn't see that coming. Right. And it's like, no, I didn't. But how's it going to help me with my test tomorrow, Dad? Or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's like when you care about the people around you, you tell stories in a way that you hope you get them. It's not about showing that you're clever. Right. It's not about any of those things. It's about service of, I hope this person gets this concept, and so I'm going to tell them this story of how I learned it. Right. Right. Whereas you sit in front of your computer, all of a sudden there's voices in the back of your head, possibly going, that'll be too obvious, or there's got to be a twist at the end, or or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden it stops being that thing that people can understand. It stops being that thing you can hold on to.
Well, and it's not about them. It becomes about you.
It becomes about you. Yeah.
Right. That's what people don't understand, that their job, there's a service job. Right.
Service industry.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to say, oh, you're a storyteller, whatever that means.
Yeah.
A songwriter or whatever, right? Oh, you're in the service industry.
Right.
No, I'm not. I'm an artist.
Right.
Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Means I'm special and do whatever I want and only think about myself. No, I don't think that's what that means.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. Just like a shaman. You're like, what do you do? It's like, well, I'm a shaman. I'm trying to help make people, help heal the people around me. Like, help people get through hard things. Like,
Yeah.
Right? That's how you would view that. It's
Right.
service industry, I
Right.
guess, if you were to call it an industry.
Well, if you're a doctor, there's
Yeah,
certain,
right.
right?
Yeah.
It's the same job.
Oh, that's really interesting, too, because, and what do doctors do? They dedicate their whole life to learning. Why? Because they never want to be in a situation where they haven't studied and someone's life's on the line or they can't fulfill
Right.
their task. And right? And
Right.
it's like, but storytellers, I feel like there isn't as much of a, well, I mean, I get it. It's not saving lives, but you
Well,
see
yes,
what I mean?
it is.
There's left.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is saving lives.
Huh.
If you're a doctor,
Yeah.
you probably learn a lot of stuff, a lot of chemistry, a lot of biology. I don't know what everything a doctor knows. There's a lot of things they learn.
Yeah.
Anatomy and whatever. But probably some of the best things they learn are the stories of when something went right and when something went wrong.
For sure.
Stories cross every profession that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's as important as any other job that you
Yeah.
think of as an important job, because it informs how all of those people do their jobs.
Yep.
It informs how pilots fly. Right? Well, this happened.
You talk about the Hudson guy. You talked about the miracle on the Hudson.
Yeah. So
I don't think you've talked about that on the podcast.
I haven't.
No.
Okay, so Sully, the Captain Sullenberg, when he landed his plane, they were flying out of New York. They hit a flock of geese and lost an engine or two, or whatever it was. But the plane was disabled, and they had to land the plane. His idea was to land the plane on the Hudson River. So when that happened, I was watching the news. And they wanted to talk to a pilot who understood what had happened, and they couldn't talk to Sully. He was still on the plane, I think, at the time. He was still he was on the wing helping people out or something, but he was still occupied saving lives. So they had another pilot on the line, on the phone, and it was a guy who had landed a plane on its belly in Iowa City. And so this guy landed this plane, so they said, oh, let's bring that guy in. So they called that guy on the phone. And the reporter, the interviewer said, so why do you think Sully was able to do this? Captain Sullenberg was able to understand that he could land a plane on the Hudson. And the guy said, well, he was a flight crash investigator. So he had more stories than most of us in his head about what had gone wrong and what had gone right, what pilots had done right and what did wrong. He said, so that was one thing. He had more stories in his head. He said something else. He said, and pilots have something that we call hangar flying. Hangar flying is when something goes bad in the air and the pilot lands, all the pilots gather around that pilot and they want to know what happened. What did you do? Then what happened? What did you do? They want to know what, yeah. And the guy said it's like going to school on someone else's tuition.
Wow. So that's just a practice.
Yeah.
That's crazy. They get out of the plane and they swap stories.
Yeah, of course. Right?
Yeah, of course.
Right? So stories do save lives.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
He had more stories in his head. And even just that practice, it was a mistake.
Right.
It wasn't like one day I was like, hey, you know what I like doing? I like bullshitting with my friends. I'll tell you what, every time you almost die, let's all stand around and talk about it. No, it happens because there's something in them that goes, I need to learn this.
Right.
How'd you make it through that?
Right. So that's the kind of stuff you need to learn how to see. Mm-hmm. How are people using stories?
Yeah.
Right? Because so you can look at formalized stories. You can watch E.T. over and over again, and that will help you. But it also will help you to see in real life how stories are being used.
Yep.
Because it changes what you do when you sit in front of that blank computer screen. Mm-hmm. It changes how you think about what you do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that survival information always has to be serious, right? It can be a comedy, right? People, they think, oh, that means everything has to be deep. That's not necessarily true, right? A comedy about being a jerk, right?
Well, Brer Rabbit, there's a lot of funny stuff.
There's a lot of funny stuff,
It's for kids. Well, you know what I mean? It's not complicated. It's not serious.
Yeah.
But there's a lesson there.
Yeah.
Man, it's funny. I was talking about this concept of survival information with somebody, and it was like a group of folks, and I was like, here, I'll prove it to you. If I say the tortoise and the hare, what am I talking about? And all of the people in the room were above 30, and they're like, I was like, do you know what I'm talking about? Everyone was like, of course I know that. I was like, when's the last time somebody told you that story? They're like, oh, jeez, I don't know, 30 years?
Yeah.
I haven't heard this story in 30 years. I was like, it's stuck in your head. And I go, in fact, do any of you remember the lesson from that? Two of the guys, well, slow and steady wins the race. And I was like, how crazy is it?
Yeah.
That when you were 4 years old,
Yeah.
someone told you something, a piece of information.
Yeah.
Right? That lodged in your brain to the point where 30 some odd years later, you can do that.
Yeah.
What if I asked you, great, same time, you were 4? What was your address when you were 4? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Then why can everyone in the room, when I can just say that little thing, it sticks in your head? Why? Because your body's going, I better remember this.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's survival information.
Yeah.
Why? Because someday I might be like the rabbit and I want to run faster. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But think about that. That's like magic.
Yeah.
It was stuck in their heads and their body was like, yep, I'm going to hold on to that.
Yeah.
The same thing with the hanger flying.
Hanger flying.
Wait,
Yeah.
what happened? Come on. No, give it to me. What happened? Well,
Right.
it's about the 15 minutes and this happened and I knew that I should.
Yeah.
You're like, give it to me. And your brain's just, yep,
Yeah.
remember it, front of the mind.
Yeah.
Right? All the other stuff you forget,
Yeah.
that's not one of them. Stories aren't one of them.
No.
There's something special about even just that concept, right?
Yeah.
And then once you realize, like, well, the cool part is once you realize that you're a storyteller, step 1, right? And then when you can start to see them around you, step 2, and then hopefully when it gets really interesting, I'm sure like most concepts, when it gets really interesting, is when you see the thing behind the thing.
Right.
Which is how powerful it is in your life and other people's lives, and how it can heal people, right? And
Yeah.
how it's more than a fun little thing. It's one of the thing. It is human to its core.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it becomes service.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, well, shoot, I got to tell them differently now.
Right.
In fact, I better keep studying because they're super important. Whether or not you make your living doing it, right? Mm-hmm. Even if it's just for the basics of caring about the other humans around you. How do I get better at this thing?
Yeah.
How do I help people get through it?
It's and having said that, I mean, learning how to see, it's amazing what it does for you, because if you learn how to see, it does also help you survive.
Yes, there's also that.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, you learn how to see and you can replicate it and all of that, but you can also apply it. And go, I always say, look, everybody knows somebody who has to learn something the hard way, and this is the way people usually talk about this. He has to learn things the hard way. That guy, he has to learn things the hard way. That's the way people talk about that guy, right? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Usually it means, well, he doesn't listen to stories. He doesn't listen to other people who've been through this. Right? So if there's a hard way, there's an easy way. Right?
Yeah, sure.
And the easy way is listening to people's stories.
Yeah.
So
Think about all the pain it cost them to learn that.
yeah.
Think about that guy who's just come down and is like, I almost died along with a whole crew of people and blah, blah. You guys want to hear my story? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pain and anxiety you had to go through.
Yeah.
Lay it on me. What
Yeah.
you got?
Yeah. And that's why I reject this idea, this entertainment idea. We've talked about it on the show.
Yeah.
But that stories are for entertainment.
Yeah.
They're not always entertaining.
Right. Remember the definition.
Yeah.
Entertainment just means to distract.
Yeah.
Distract from what?
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is from your life.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're talking about is like, how do you save your life?
Yeah.
How do you save your life and the lives of others? Like, how do you
Yeah.
navigate this thing? There's nothing entertaining about that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And by entertainment, I mean just distracting.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But stories can be entertaining.
Yeah.
But really they're engaging.
Right.
Right? So sometimes I think engagement makes people think of entertainment.
Got it.
Right? They're
Yeah, because
engaged.
Brer Rabbit, it's like there's some funny stuff, and he says
Yeah.
some funny lines where it was like, but that's not why you remember it.
Right.
That's not what you're responding to.
Yeah.
We're just kind of attributing the wrong things to the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really interesting. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks.
Next time on You Are a Storyteller.
The idea that there's something new to say about storytelling is ridiculous. It's not we're not talking about technology or anything like that. We're talking about an ancient form.
Thanks for watching You Are a Storyteller. If you have any questions or there's a storytelling topic you want us to cover, leave a comment below or email us at hello@believeagency.com.